All right, my holy friends, we're going to try doing a couple of screencasts today. The first one will be on our Mishnah that we covered last week, but because it was interrupted with a little Hanukkah project, which was fantastic, by the way, we'll jump right back into the Mishnah, this time with the accompaniment of the Perush HaRashbam. The Rashbam's commentary, which, as we explained in class, takes over for Rashi. Rashi passed away before he finished Masechet Pesachim, and right over here, where it says Perush Rabbeinu Shmuel Talmid Rashi, is the commentary of the Rashbam, which is a little lengthier than Rashi's more succinct comments. Rashbam's comments are a little lengthier. This was Rashi's grandson, the Rashbam, who takes over and finishes up Masechet Pesachim. So we'll be seeing that. While we're going over this Mishnah and the Rashbam, we'll see 3 Rashbams inside, plus we will see a Machloket Rashbam and Tosfot. You can be filling that out in your packets right over here. This packet number 1. And at the end of this first video, you should be completed page number 2, which will discuss the 3 laws in the first Mishnah, as well as the 3 comments in the Rashbam and the Machloket Rashbam Tosfot. If you've already filled most of this out, that's fantastic. You can just go over it. But this Machloket Rashbam Tosfot especially, not everybody has down. Let's go over it together inside, and I think this will help us as, sometimes, or at least as of late, the frontal teaching has been a little more challenging to get us all in the game. This way, each of you has a personal chavrutza now with me, which I'm sure you are all super thrilled about. So here we go. Erev Pesachim Samuch LaMincha. On Erev Pesach, Samuch LaMincha, close to Mincha time, Lo Yochal Adam Ad Shetachshach. So on Erev Pesach, so for example, Pesach's on a Wednesday. Pesach's Wednesday night. So Wednesday during the day, once it reaches the time of Samuch LaMincha, which we'll discuss in a second when that is, Lo Yochal Adam Ad Shetachshach. You can no longer eat until it gets dark. I should point out right now that you should be taking the translations down of this Mishnah, as if you've seen the review for the final. First of all, number 1 goal of learning is lishma, learning for the sake of learning, and rising up in kedusha through our learning. But an added incentive is to prepare for our final. You will be expected to be able to read and translate this Mishnah for the final. So please take down the notes as we go through this. But on Erev Pesach, so for example, if Pesach's Wednesday night, Wednesday during the day, Erev Pesach, Samuch LaMincha, once it reaches this time of Samuch LaMincha, Lo Yochal Adam Ad Shetachshach. Once it reaches Samuch LaMincha, you can't eat anymore until it gets dark. Now, what you can, what you can't eat, that'll be a discussion in the Gemara, or actually from the Rishonim. It'll really emerge from the Rishonim what you are and what you are not allowed to eat at that point. But for now, you got to stop eating until it gets dark. Looking back at our chart, which you may have in your notes, hopefully you do have in your notes, our Shaud Zmanio chart, we explained that when the Mishnah says Samuch LaMincha, by Mincha could mean 2 different things, because there are 2 different time periods that we refer to as Mincha. First, we have what's called Mincha Ketana. Mincha Ketana, because it's closer to Shkia. It's Katan, because there are less hours in the day from this time, from Mincha Ketana, than Mincha Gedola, which is the big Mincha, or when there's more hours left in the day. We'll talk about when that is in a second. Mincha Ketana is at the 9.5 hour mark. Now, when we say 9.5 halachic hours, again, I'm not going to go back into the whole topic of Shaud Zmaniyot. If you missed that, we'll go over it again privately another time. But the day is divided into 12 hours. When I say 9.5, we mean 9 full hours have gone by, 9 full halachic hours have gone by, and now we are halfway into the next hour. So 9.5 is 9 full hours plus halfway into the 10th hour. According to this chart, if the day had started at 6 in the morning, if Neitzachama, if sunrise was at 6 a.m., Mincha Ketana would be at 3:30. 9 full hours and half into the 10th hour. That's 9.5 hours, that's Mincha Ketana. Mincha Gedola, though, is at 6.5 hours, 6 full hours and a half into the 7th hour, which would be like right over here. So when our Mishnah said, you got to stop eating Samuch LaMincha, which one is it referring to? This is a big nafkamina. There's a very large practical difference here. If we're talking about Mincha Ketana and I can eat until 3:30, or if we're talking about Mincha Gedola and I have to stop eating at approximately 12:30. Very big difference. So let's look at our Rashbam, the commentary of the Rashbam. And the majority of Rishonim agree with this Rashbam, or say similar to this Rashbam. Arve Pesachim Samuch LeMincha. What are we referring to? Mincha Ketana. We're referring to Mincha Ketana. So there's a bit of a leniency here. Or at least we're not going super strict on you. I guess it's already strict that you have to stop eating at a certain point, but it's not as strict as it could be. You can eat until Mincha Ketana, until 9.5 hours. But the Mishnah didn't say mincha, it said samuch lemincha. So what does samuch mean? So the Rashbam goes on to explain, kodem lemincha me'at. We mean you have to stop eating a little bit before mincha. Kodem lemincha me'at, chatzi sha'a bitchilat sha'a asirit. You have to go back another half an hour until you get to the beginning of the 10th hour, which makes sense. If you look at the chart, we said mincha ketana is 9.5 hours, so it's in the middle of the 10th hour. But now we're saying samuch lemincha means half an hour before mincha, which would be right at the end of the 9th, right at the beginning of the 10th hour. That's what the Rashbam was referring to when he said, we go back to tchilat sha'asirit. Right at the beginning of that 10th hour is going to be when you have to stop eating on Erev Pesach. So what you have right here is, first of all, our first case in the Mishnah, which you can fill in your packet. And also that first Rashbam, we're referring to Mincha Ketana. And Samuch LeMincha means 30 minutes before that, right at the beginning of the 10th hour. Very good. Let's go back to the Mishnah. Second case of the Mishnah, which is unrelated to the first case. Afilu ani sheb'Yisrael lo yochal ad sheyesev. Even a poor person amongst the Jewish people should not eat at Seder night until he leans. We know that leaning is a sign of royalty. It's a sign of ultimate freedom. The Mishnah's chiddush, the Mishnah's concept, novel concept here is that even poor people have to act in the ultimate dignified royal way. You have to lean on at your seders, when you drink 4 cups, when you eat matzah. There are many things we lean for. Even poor people are included in that. They cannot eat until they lean. And that's case number 2, or part number 2 of our Mishnah. And point number 3 of our Mishnah, which over here we're going to see a small machloket between the Rashbam and Tosfot. But before we get to that, I realized back to case number 1, where we said that you got to stop eating. Lo yochal adam ad shetachsha. You got to stop eating. There was a question: why do you have to stop eating? So if you look at the Rashbam, I missed this one over here, but it's in your packet. Lo yochal adam v'chule. Why do you have to stop eating? Kidei sheyochal matzah shel mitzvah leteavon. Leteavon. You should eat the reason why you have to stop eating is in order that when you consume your matzah shel mitzvah, which is a mitzvah, right? Your mitzvah matzah on Seder night, it should be leteavon. It should be with an appetite. It should be with a desire. And all of this is because mishum hidur mitzvah. It's because we want to beautify the mitzvah. It's not just about eating matzah on Pesach. It's about enjoying matzah on Pesach. It's about beautifying. It's about making the experience even more special. If you're full, you're just not going to be as excited for the matzah. Be a little hungry. Get excited for the mitzvah. This connects to our Rav Lichtenstein piece earlier. We saw also in Rav Moshe, the idea of, we have all these heterim of traveling on Sukkot, all these different things. But don't go out of your way to miss out on mitzvah. Look for opportunities, not just to perform them. Here we're saying to beautify them. It connects very nicely to Chanukah. We just had Chanukah. Also, the idea of a hidur mitzvah. We're going to light candles, not just one candle a night, which is the mitzvah. We're going to light 1 and then 2 and then 3, and everyone in the family is going to light. We're going to try to beautify the mitzvah as much as possible. That's what we're about. Okay, very nice. Let's get to this third and final case of our Mishnah. V'lo yipachtu lo me'arba kosot shel yain ve'afilu min hatamchui. So this last case is a matter of dispute what it's talking about. First, let's try to translate it. V'lo yipachtu lo me'arba kosot shel yain. You shouldn't have less than 4 cups of wine on Pesach. Ve'afilu min hatamchui. And even from the tamchui, even from the charity plate. So what exactly is this talking about? So let's look at the Rashbam first. The Rashbam says in Dibur Matchil Ve'afilu, what are we talking about? Hu mitparnes mitamchui shel tzedakah. The Mishnah is referring to, or from the perspective of the ani, from the poor person. We're referring to a person who is so poor that they are receiving money from the tamchui shel tzedakah. They are receiving money from this special charity, from this tamchui fund. What was special about this tamchui fund? Dahainu ani shibanim. This fund was only allocated to the poor of the poor. Ani shibanim. Ditnan, as we learn in a Mishnah in Masechet Peah, Mi sheyesh lo mazon shtei seudot lo yitol min hatamchui. Right? If you had enough food that you could afford 2 meals a day, back then they only ate 2 meals a day. So Shabbos was special. Shalashidus, the third meal was special for Shabbos. But Mi sheyesh lo mazon shtei seudot, somebody that had enough for 2 meals, lo yitol min hatamchui. You weren't allowed to take from this charity plate. So again, this charity went only to the poor of the poor. When we say in the Mishnah, right, B'afilu mina tamchui, the tamchui again was a charity fund only for the poorest of the poor. So what's our Mishnah saying according to the Rashbam? What it's saying is, let's get it over here, Mi sheyesh lo mazon shtei seudot, lo yitol mina tamchui. So afilu hachi, im lo natnu lo gabeit staka. So if we're referring to, in our Mishnah, a case of a person that was so poor that he couldn't afford 2 meals, nonetheless, if he im lo natnu lo gabeit staka, yimkor et malbusho, o yilveh o yaskir et atzmo bishvil yain l'arba kosot. If he wasn't able to get 4 cups from the gabeit staka, from the charity funds, from people giving out charity, he should sell his clothing, he should sell or rent himself in order that he can attain the necessary funds to buy wine for the 4 cups. According to the Rashbam, how he would read this last line is, V'lo yipachtu lo mi'arba kosot shel yain. Someone who is so poor, ve'afilu mina tamchui, someone who is so poor that he even gets money from the tamchui because he can't afford even 2 meals a day, he can't have less than 4 cups of wine. He has to make sure, this poor person will have to go door to door. He'll have to sell his own clothing to make sure that he has 4 cups of wine on Pesach. That's the extent. That's how important 4 cups is. That even if he's collecting money from the tamchui because he can't afford 2 meals a day, he still needs to push and go really beyond and beyond to make sure that he can have his 4 cups. That's how the Rashbam understands this last case of our Mishnah. Tosfot says no. This is not coming from the perspective of the ani, from the poor person. This Mishnah is referring through the lens of the gabayin, the gabei tzedakah, the charity collectors, the people that are giving out the charity. Tosfot understands it like this, and we'll say it outside. V'lo yipachtu lo mi'arba kosot shel yain. The gabei tzedakah, the charity collectors, they make sure that no poor person has less than 4 cups of wine on Pesach. That all poor people have 4 cups of wine, ve'afilu min hatamchui, even if they have to break into the tamchui charity fund in order to make sure that it happens. So even if you have a poor person that can afford 2 meals a day, so usually he would be ineligible to get from the tamchui because he could afford 2 meals a day. Nonetheless, 4 cups of wine are so important that the gabei tzedakah can even break into that charity fund, that tamchui, to make sure that all poor people, even not the super poor people, even just, I guess, the moderately poor people that can afford 2 meals a day, still super poor according to our standards, but these people, v'afilu mina tamchui, they'll be able to get their 4 cups of wine. So in the end, we have an interesting machloket on this last case of Rashbam against Tosfot. According to the Rashbam, we're referring to the ani, that even if you are so poor that you can't afford 2 meals a day, so you're so poor that you're vafilu mina tamchui, that you have to collect money from the tamchui, nonetheless, you poor person, have to push yourself to sell things, whatever you have to do to make sure that you can get 4 cups of wine. According to Tosfot, no, we're referring to the gabei tzedakah, that the charity collectors have to make sure that all poor people, even not the super poor, but even people that can afford 2 meals a day, the gabei tzedakah will even break into the tamchui fund to make sure that no poor person has less than 4 cups of wine on Seder nights. All right, get this down in your notes, and you're good to go to video number 2.